In this video, we're going to be covering what the best doubloon premium ships are to buy in the game at each tier. We are not going to be considering global XP ships or any other form of currency in the game. First off, don't ever compare global XP ships to doubloon ships because GXP ships are free to earn. You shouldn't be paying for them. You can literally earn them if you play the game long enough. Let's start at low tiers and work our way up. Tier 4. Now, the options at Tier 4 are a little slim, but I would say most players really aren't going to stay down here forever. If you like playing lower tiers though, or you just want an option for a little cheaper ship to kind of get your feet wet in the game, the best choice without consideration for anything else is the Julio Cesare. Hands down, this is one of the best battleships. I feel like pound for pound, tier for tier, she is just a ton of fun. It's a pretty agile battleship, which is one of my favorite traits, and especially at lower tiers where, you have American standard battleships like the Texas, the Oklahoma, and they're very slow. I feel like the speed of Julio Cesare is also a little noob friendly, being able to move around the map at 27 knots. If you go the wrong direction, you don't really know the maps yet, and you sail around an island that maybe you shouldn't have, well, the Julio is quick enough that you can get back in the fight and still have fun. The caliber isn't very big, but that's okay. It's going to prevent overpins happening so much at lower tiers, especially since you have very high velocity shells. They fly through the air really fast. It's going to make aiming a lot easier if you are a newer player. To top it all off, Julio Cesare has decent AA for the tier, and this is a tier where you kind of want to be careful about that. You could get in a ship like the Viribus Unitas, the pan-European battleship. It has an AA DPS of 9, so you're better off throwing your shoe at the aircraft circling above you, but it gets worse. Rio de Janeiro has 0 AA, and at tier 3s and tier 5s, you're going to have a lot of CVs. So Julio Cesare really checks all of the boxes if you want a entry level, a cheap premium just to earn things. Or if you're doing your weekly missions and looking for a fun little tier 4 to go to AI with, here you go. Honorable mentions at this tier, the USS Hill. It is slightly faster and more stealthy than the Farragut, but Farragut has the better reload, and to me that makes Farragut more powerful. And it makes Farragut the most powerful gunboat at the tier. And in my eyes, that's the end of the discussion. One's free, one's not. And if I think the free one's better, that's it. Hill does have one more torpedo. She has 9 torpedoes instead of 8. But with a 5.5 kilometer range, you're not really using your torpedoes that much anyway. So yeah, as far as tier 4 goes, the Julio is really the only one that I would consider. Now that's going to bring us to tier 5. Tier 5. Battleships are king at this tier, and there are some super strong battleships that you can get your hands on. My top pick is Hyuga, and it took me a long time to finally call Hyuga the best. Warspite is always in the discussion, and there are some other good battleships down here. I love the Queen Elizabeth as well, but if we're strictly talking premiums that you can buy, I think Hyuga is number 1. For starters, look at the HP pool. This is essentially a tier 6 battleship HP pool. You're going to be more tanky than quite a few tier 6 battleships. And with those heals, you have the highest effective HP pool at the tier. The armor is also really good. You have a 32mm deck, meaning that most tier 5 HE spammers, their shells are just going to shatter on your deck and not deal damage. You can get set on fire still, sure, but so can any other battleship at the tier. Side plating is also decent. And the Citadel is below water. If you ever want to see an interesting Citadel, go pull the armor viewer up of the Hyuga. It is a weird one, that is for sure, but it is below the waterline, so yeah. The best part about this ship is that Hyuga comes with 2 main battery reload boosters, and that's pretty self-explanatory why that's so powerful. I mean, you already have one of the best salvo weights at the tier, only beaten by the American California, Tennessee, and New Mexico. And so with that huge salvo weight, you also get reload boosters to boot. Not to mention her Sigma is 1.8, which is just a slap in the face to Fuso, which is 1.5. Fuso, of course, is the tier 5 shotgun. But yeah, 1.8 Sigma, that is tied with California, New Mex, and Tennessee as being some of the most accurate battleships at tier 5. Now, the most accurate battleship at tier 5 is my number 2 pick, and that is the British Warspite. which aside from being the coolest named ship in the history of ever, this is the most accurate battleship at Tier 5, I would say. 2.0 Sigma, and then better than USN Dispersion, so pretty darn accurate. The 381s, that's a decent sized shell for the tier, 15-inch guns. They're very punchy, and they are unique to British battleships because they get normal fuse timers. 0.033 fuse timers, they are not short fused. It might lead to more overpins against broadside cruisers, but honestly, I find the Warspite to be very, very consistent. She's definitely not fast by any means, but most battleships at this tier aren't, so pick your poison. The turning circle is nice and tight though, and it makes it easy to turn and bring your guns in and out of the fight and avoid incoming fire. Honestly, all these years later, the Warspite is still a very, very good ship. The footage in the background is the Warspite B. Keep in mind, just because it's a black version of a premium ship, there are no stat differences, so, you know, we're showing the Warspite B, but it's just like the Warspite. Honorable mentions. West Virginia is an interesting Tier 5 battleship because she has 406mm guns, basically Colorado guns at Tier 5. That's huge for Tier 5. However, she is slow and has terrible AA, and I think that makes her CV food. Personally, I like the Mutsu, but I know not many people would agree with me on that one. I think her guns are very dangerous, and they are massive at 410mm. That is the biggest gun at Tier 5, I do believe. She's also much faster than the West Virginia, however, she still is going to suffer from poor AA and very, very light armor, mostly 25mm everywhere. So anything with 152mm guns, that Dallas over there that's looking at you, licking its lips, yeah, it can pin you basically everywhere. So if you get caught in a bad position with the Mutsu, you're in trouble. Still though, I think she is a fun battleship and the torpedoes are meme worthy. As for my favorite premium cruiser, it's really no comparison at all. I like the Duca d'Aosta, the Italian light cruiser. She's not tanky at all, but she is very fast and very stealthy. The ship can go 36.5 knots in a straight line, making her the fastest cruiser at Tier 5 if we're not talking about consumables like speed boosters. She also has a very fast 6.5 second rudder shift time. It's a really agile little cruiser. It gets better though. The detection range is 9.9 kilometers, which is pretty crazy. On my build, I think I have it down to 9.3, and you could honestly make it better than that if you wanted. As if that wasn't good enough, Duca has rapid firing guns with sap shells. Now, I think sap shells are the best shell type in the entire game, depending on what you're fighting, but they're really, really good. And since you have 152mm guns instead of 203s like is found on most of the rest of the Italian cruiser line, the DPM is really, really good. For instance, the highest explosive DPM number at Tier 5 is 160,000. Duca's SAP DPM is 231,000. So this ship can really put out a lot of punishment. Yeah, you're not going to be setting fires, but these little shells pin 40mm of armor, which is enough to deal damage to basically any ship at the tier, including most of the battleships, most anywhere. You just have to avoid shooting at the belt and you'll be able to deal solid damage. This cruiser really is the all-around package. I think her thin armor and slim profile means that battleships can overpin oftentimes, which is great. It's just icing on the cake. This is definitely my top pick, hands down. Runner-ups could include the HMS Exeter for a couple big reasons. Number one, the sonar is really strong on Exeter. It's 5.1 kilometers, and she gets a 99-second smokescreen. Tier 5 cruisers are going to struggle a lot with survivability because there are so many amazing battleships down here. You know, you have California's Warspites and Hyugas all around. Cruisers don't get a second rudder module or a concealment module, and most of them don't have heals, so it's scary to play cruisers at Tier 5. However, the Exeter, with her smokescreen, it's going to help keep you alive a little bit longer. She has a really fast rudder shift, honestly, for a big heavy cruiser, and single launch torpedoes. I've always enjoyed this ship. I just seem to get along well with her. De Grasse is also a very solid French cruiser at the tier. I don't ever seem to put up amazing games in her, and you know, I'm pretty decent in French cruisers, so I'm going to rank her just a little bit lower. Maybe that is my own skill issue, I don't know. But I cannot move off of Tier 5 without talking about the Grashby, because even though it's not the best Tier 5 cruiser, it is the coolest by far, and I get asked about her, him, whatever, a lot. Leave it to the Germans to build this Frankenstein cruiser with battleship guns on a cruiser hull. Graf's guns are large, 283 millimeters. They're great for punishing cruisers and battleships that give you a broadside. The Sigma is 1.9, and the dispersion is battle cruiser dispersion, so in theory, the ship is supposed to be accurate. However, with only 6 guns and a 20-second reload, Graf doesn't feel very accurate. The guns are going to troll you without a doubt, so just go ahead and prepare yourself for that. On top of that, since you're a big, heavy hulking cruiser, you may think you can go toe-to-toe with battleships, but it's also not the case. A lot of the armor is 19 millimeters, so you can be overmatched by basically any Tier 5 battleship and by your own guns. You get heals, which is great for a Tier 5 cruiser, but they're pretty small. Still though, with almost 40,000 HP and those little heals, you are going to be the tankiest cruiser at Tier 5, I would say. And go ahead and throw on some German torpedoes, and I like the placement on the Graf Spee. It's pretty interesting. They're on the back of the ship, and what I find is it helps them stay in the fight longer. They don't get blown up off of your ship as often as if it were mounted in the middle of the ship, which is where most of the enemy shells are going to land. They reach 8 kilometers, they reload decently quick. You know, they're just average German torpedoes. You also get a 5.3 kilometer sonar, and it all makes the ship pretty fun. My top destroyer pick for Tier 5 is also German. The T-61 can do anything and everything. You get your usual smoke, plus a very useful sonar that can detect ships at 4 kilometers. A lot of times players down here don't really know about that, so the smoke sonar trap is very, very powerful against enemy DDs. The guns are not super impressive since it's German HE. They're not going to set fires well or deal a lot of damage, but they do reload very fast, and if you're using your AP, it gives you the best AP DPM at Tier 5 out of any of the destroyers. The torpedoes also reload very, very fast, 68 seconds. So while your guns and your torpedoes, they don't deal a ton of alpha damage, they both reload so fast that you're basically always a threat. Unfortunately, T-61 is slow and kind of sluggish when it comes to the maneuverability, but honestly, it's not a deal breaker. It definitely doesn't feel as bad as, say, an Akazuki, and if you've played that ship, you know what I mean. She doesn't feel that sluggish. She still gets around the map just fine. Now, a runner-up that I think is kind of slept on is the Anshan. It is a Nevny hull, and it sails under the Pan-Asian flag. The cool thing about her is that you can have normal torpedoes, non-deepwater torpedoes, on a Pan-Asian DD, and I think that might be the only one in the game that you can do that. Now, if you have this torpedo setup, they only reach 6 kilometers. That's not a lot. Basically, you're going to have enemies sailing into you. Yeah, but the torpedoes go 75 knots, which is insanely fast at Tier 5, and then you could buff into the range a little bit if you wanted, maybe use cleaves as an inspiration. And if you buffed the torpedo speed, you could probably get it up past 80 knots, which is like Yudachi Screamer torpedoes. And the ship has Nevny guns. It makes her a decent little gunboat. Yeah, I always thought this one was slept on. She's interesting, unique, and pretty darn strong. Now that is going to conclude Tier 5 and bring us up to Tier 6. My top battleship pick for Tier 6 is, of course, the Nelson. If I sit and think, I'm going to get up-tiered into a Tier 7 match, what battleship do I want to take to be competitive? There's only one choice, and it is the Nelson. Nothing else comes close to that. For starters, Nelson is very survivable, despite what you might think, because she gets super heals. She has an effective HP pool of 106,000. That is quite a lot. Now, the armor isn't that great, of course. You have a massive 25mm bow and a citadel that is super high above the waterline. Really, there's nothing more fun than citadeling a Nelson through the front. But if you know what you're doing and you can angle your armor, it's really not such a big deal, and Nelson can be very, very tanky. The guns are accurate. She has a Sigma of 1.9. It's usually a pretty reliable gun platform. The AP doesn't pin a ton because it is short fused, but the HE is some of the best high explosive shells in the game. Each shell deals 6,900 damage and has a 46% chance of setting fires. So yeah, if you're in a Nelson in a Tier 7 match and you can stay alive and not get focused, you can put up some really big damage numbers. Now, the bad parts of Nelson is that she's very slow, and that is one of the biggest downsides. If you position her in the wrong spot, well, you could have a pretty boring match. A runner-up option that I don't see mentioned a lot is the Resistance. Now, I think this ship is very fun. I'm super partial to British battlecruisers, I have to say. I love the Hawk, I love the Duncan, the Repulse, all of them. I think they're some of the more fun battleships or battlecruisers, whatever you want to call them, to play in the game. Looking at Resistance on the surface, she doesn't look amazing. You have 6 guns and, you have flashbacks of the Gneisenau, of course, but the Sigma is 2.1, which is insane, and you get battlecruiser dispersion. So this is a really accurate ship. You have 4 torpedoes on each side, and I think they're all in single launch mounts. They're the wiggle torpedoes that kind of do the funny squiggling around when you launch them. They reach 10.5 kilometers, so yeah, you have a pretty big torpedo armament that can reach quite a ways. She also comes with a speed boost, 4.2 kilometer sonar, and heals that are good for 8,900 health apiece. Now, Resistance is very lightly armored, so you have to be careful, just like most of the battlecruisers. You can't be sitting bow on. You need to learn to armor angle and just be careful about what position you're getting yourself into. We can't leave Tier 6 battleships without talking about the Scharnhorst. Like the Grafspee, I don't consider this a comp ship, but man, the Scharnhorst is cool. This is one of the most handsome ships, I think. Super low freeboard. Yeah, I don't know. There's something just fascinating about the Scharnhorst to me. She has 283mm guns, very small for battleship, 2.0 Sigma and German dispersion. The AP pen, sometimes it doesn't feel great in some of the matches I was recently playing in her. And of course, you just want to brawl in this ship, and those opportunities are few and far between. But I have to say, I did get a match where I could finally do some brawling, and it felt good, and it redeemed Scharnhorst for me. Most of the time, though, I think you would want to play as a battlecruiser from mid to long ranges and just kind of bide your time and wait for the time to be right to push and be aggressive. But you have those decent secondaries and, of course, the torpedoes. So the dream of every Scharnhorst player is to get in there and brawl. Of course, you have to be careful. You have tanky armor, but low health and mediocre heals. As for the cruiser at Tier 6, my top pick is the Abruzzi, for a lot of the same reasons I like the Duca d'Aosta. You have very fast-firing 152mm sap guns on a sleek and agile ship. These Italian cruisers are a fun alternative playstyle. They're the only cruisers in the game that I play with an agile build anymore. I don't think I can think of any other agile cruisers that I take out. Maybe the Ochakov, but I don't ever play that ship anymore either. Abruzzi is very fragile, of course. Like the Duca d'Aosta, you have to be careful with your dodging or just use the amazing stealth, because 9.7 kilometers stock sea detection is very, very sneaky. Only the Tiger 59 is sneakier. And guess what ship isn't on my buyer's guide today? Yeah, the Tiger 59. Abruzzi's damage output isn't quite as busted feeling as the Duca d'Aosta. It feels a lot more balanced for the tier, but that doesn't mean you still can't put up large damage numbers. You also get your typical Italian sea mine torpedoes. They're super slow, but long range, and it's always a delight when you get a hit with one of those. Now, unfortunately, the Abruzzi and the Duca, they don't get the smoke exhaust, but one thing you do get is the sonar instead, and that's going to make it a lot easier to fight against destroyers, protect you from torpedoes. On to the destroyers. My top pick is Z35, hands down. It is the best destroyer at the tier. It could almost be a tier 7. I do hold the Holland and the Kid in high regards as well. More on those in a minute. The Z35 has a 5-kilometer sonar, and that's what's funny about it to me. The Z23 and the Z46, both tiers higher, they have a much worse 4.4-kilometer sonar. So yeah, I do think Z35 with her HP pool and everything that she has could have almost been a tier 7. You get the smoke as well, and one of the biggest HP pools for a tier 6 destroyer. The guns have the same issue as T61. The HE doesn't hit hard, but you get quarter pin, and that means you're going to shatter less when farming bigger targets. And like the T61, your reload is fast enough that if you're using the AP, you have the best AP DPM out of any other destroyer at the tier. Z35 also has decent torpedoes. They're not bad. They don't deal a ton of damage, but they do have 9-kilometer range, which is good at tier 6, and a 90-second reload. also good. Really, the ship is a jack of all trades. It has so many tools at its disposal all the time. It's always a scary destroyer to face at Tier 6. Worth mentioning, I never talk about alternative game modes, but there was just the 1v1 brawl mode for Tier 6 destroyers, and ships like this that have smoke and sonar, T-61, Z-35, they make it pretty easy to fudge ranked like that and just kind of speed run it. So maybe that's worth throwing in there. Now, my runner-up is going to be the Uland, the pan-European destroyer. Like Z-35, Uland can do basically anything. You don't have smokes though, so I would be careful recommending this ship to. You do, however, get 2 heals, DFAA, and a speed boost. The guns are slept on. You only have 4 guns and 2 mounts, but the reload is 2.5 seconds. That is very, very fast, and it's going to give Uland the second best HE DPM at the entire tier. Pretty impressive. Torp armament is small. You only have 6 torpedoes, but they reach 12 kilometers. And the torpedoes go 80 knots. They also reload very quickly, so you can keep spitting them out and out and out and out. My favorite part, though, is the gun angles. Bad gun angles on ships usually ruin the ships for me, and I think of Marlborough, Pommern, and the Cossack. Uland and Cossack 38, they have the same exact HE DPM. It's 163,000. Just under the Benson. The Benson is the only destroyer better than that. But if you've ever played the Cossack 38, you have to nearly be flat broadside to have all of your guns firing, and the Uland doesn't have that problem. If you're sitting flat broadside, it makes you a very big, easy target to hit, and that's not very good for destroyer versus destroyer engagements. Now that's going to bring us to Tier 7. Now, Tier 7 has a massive amount of really strong global XP ships that we cover a lot on this channel because I like to focus on things that are free or cheap for you guys. So again, global XP ships can be earned for free with a little bit of grinding, but if you're itching for a new Tier 7 premium and you want to burn that 70% off coupon, let's start with the battleships. There are only 2 options currently, and they're complete polar opposites, so I'm not going to say one is better than the other. Constellation is an American battle cruiser. This is an extremely squishy ship. You shouldn't play it like a typical battleship because her armor is just so light. A thin 27mm bow, only 20% torp reduction, a giant freeboard. It makes you a very easy target, and a big superstructure. I could go on, but I think you get the point. I would tell people to think of this as a cruiser. Treat it like a cruiser. You want to stay in the shadows, stay hidden, and don't be tanking a lot of damage because it's not like a normal battleship in that regard. You just can't tank very well. What she does have, though, is extremely accurate guns. 1.9 Sigma and battlecruiser dispersion. She can honestly be kind of scary to see on the other team, especially if you're in a cruiser, just because of how accurate this ship can be. She also gets radar. It reaches 9.9 kilometers and lasts for 30 seconds. That is a powerful thing for a battleship to have. And torpedoes. 9.2 kilometer torpedoes. They only go 55 knots though, and again, with your poor armor, they're really just a last ditch thing, not for brawling. Since the range is kind of longer, if you're kiting away, you can throw them down at people running into you, but definitely don't think because you have torpedoes, you should sail in and get them off because you're going to be very disappointed. Overall, Constellation, if you know how to play a battlecruiser and you can protect yourself, she is fun and she is strong. Atlantico, again, it's like the polar opposite. Atlantico has the largest secondaries in the game. They're 234 millimeters. It means they pin a ton of armor and they deal a good amount of damage, on top of having a super high fire chance and a really long range, 11.8 kilometers on my build. This is easily one of the best secondary battleships in the game. Now, the downside is that the ship is very slow as a Kansas at 25 knots. If you position poorly in the Atlantico, you're not going to have a ton of fun because, one, you can't run from anything, or if people are running from you and you're just in the wrong position, you're not going to be able to catch up and really do anything. I like to put the ship in a central location, so you're going to be in the action easily, and if you can, find an island to protect yourself because you want to keep your secondary mounts safe. If you're getting pounded by HE or by enemies, you can lose a lot of your secondary batteries, and then you're going to be pretty mediocre. The main guns, they're 381 millimeters. I think they're like Warspite guns, if I remember hearing that correctly. They're AP only, though. You can never fire HE shells. And again, 381s are not very big for tier 7, so it's not the greatest main battery armament. You also don't have a very large HP pool in Atlantico, so you have to be careful. You do have pretty decent armor though when it comes down to it. The Citadel is way below the waterline, and that's going to protect you and keep you safe. And you also have good deck armor, so she can be tanky. Overall, as a secondary ship, Atlantico is still a lot of fun, and you can definitely have some big games in her still. When it comes to the premium cruisers at tier 7, I think there are two very good, and I kind of surprised myself. I'm going to put the Wichita in first place. Now, I think the Wichita is a better solo ship, where the Plymouth would be a better division ship. Wichita is a lot more survivable. She has really good armor, mostly 27 millimeters. It's going to protect you from 15-inch guns, so you can bully Bismarcks, those new Neon Tirpitzes, Richelieus, and other battleships with that caliber of gun. Also, she's a pretty thin ship and seems to draw overpins, especially since her Citadel is small. It's not under the turrets at all. It's just in the middle of the ship under the funnels. Wichitas are notorious for being hard to kill. They're honestly very annoying to play against, and you know that is a good trait in a ship. Wichita is also a pretty small ship, and that's going to make her agile. A 680 meter turning circle, that is small, that is excellent, and a 6-second rudder shift time that is also very excellent. She also has radar, sonar, and heals. The guns are mediocre, I would say. You have average DPM, average HE, average AP, nothing like Baltimore or Rochester's AP, nothing like that at all. But still, it gets the job done, and it's just a decent package. As a mostly solo player through the week, yeah, Wichita would be my choice over Plymouth, even though Plymouth is insanely strong, and we're going to talk about her next. 16 guns with short fuse Brit AP and improved pin angles. Plymouth hits like a truck, especially if you can get broadsides. Plymouth also gets very strong 11-kilometer torpedoes. That is much better than the Belfast 43's 8-kilometer torpedoes. You also get insane radar, but you have to drop a smoke for it. So if you use the radar, it's a Minotaur radar. It lasts 40 seconds and reaches 9.9 kilometers, but you're not going to have the smoke, and so your survivability at the tier is not going to be that great. You do get a very good sonar, 4.9 kilometer ship detection. I mean, that's very good. But the ship is going to be better in the division because it really does better if you have someone spotting or tanking for you. The agility of the ship, it's really not that great. She stops slow, and she just doesn't move around the map that good. So dodging battleship rounds in the open water isn't necessarily that fun, and with such squishy armor, the Plymouth can explode dramatically, and playing her here recently has kind of led me to not enjoy the ship as much solo, and this is coming from a radar Minotaur player. Yeah, the Plymouth just wasn't really doing it for me solo. In a division though, this ship is so much fun. So yeah, that's how I would divide it up. Solo player, Wichita, division, Plymouth. Now, the British heavy cruiser, the Hampshire, I also have to mention her, but I don't think she's in the same league as the above two cruisers. You are welcome to check out my full-length video on the Hampshire below, though, if you are interested. No premium destroyer at tier 7. There are good ones available for GXP, though, and also there are no standalone premiums at tier 8, so that really concludes the list. Now, there are a ton of other premium ships out there that are still good in their own way. Maybe they're not on my radar, or, you know, I don't know. It's just hard to cover that many ships, so maybe in the future we can talk about those. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. This is Derka signing off. Catch you in the next one.